In the lands between, order is not a human invention. It is a living grammar that descends from the sky, settles into root and bone, then asks every creature to breathe in its cadence. Before names were written in gold, before thrones were shaped like timbered halos, there was a law older than any crown. The Elden Ring was that law, a constellation of runes that held the world together. It was not a ring in the simple sense, but a pattern of principles that defined life, death, growth, and meaning. When it rested within a vessel, the land turned in harmony with its radiance. When it cracked, even rivers forgot where to flow. Above the lands between, beyond the firmament that mortals can see, dwelt a chorus of outer powers. Among them, the greater will sent a vassal star into the world, the Elden Beast, to become the living heart of the Elden Ring. The greater will spoke through envoys called the Two Fingers, half silent, half oracular, guiding chosen people toward a particular vision of stability. That vision was not always called the Golden Order. In earlier ages, other forms of balance held sway and other gods had their turns. The ancient dragons ruled from storm and stone, and their lord Placidusax waited in a broken time for a god who had fled. The crucible, a primal wellspring of life where all forms were mingled, poured its chaotic blessings into beasts and men alike. These older ways were not evil by nature. They were simply different shapes of the same cosmic hunger, each trying to answer the question of what a world should be. In that primordial age, destined death lived openly within the Elden Ring. Even divinity had an end, and endings were part of the world's health. The shadow of mortality lent weight to vows, and the seasons could close without being called a tragedy. Yet alongside that natural law rose a countercurrent. The Godskin apostles and their nobles served an Empyrean remembered as the Gloam-Eyed Queen. They wielded black flame that could slay gods, and their hunts show that the notion of godhood was once less stable than the Erdtree age would later allow. Malekith, a shadow-bound beast, would in time defeat that queen at Marika's command, and the true god-slaying reach of black flame would be lost when destined death was sealed away. These tales are important not for spectacle, but for what they imply. Long before gold rose, the world had already seen orders bloom and fail. The greater will's desire for a lasting regime was born from that long memory of volatility. Then a new figure rose from the margins. Marika, of Numen descent, came from a people touched by elsewhere. Accounts tied to the realm of shadow suggest she once lived among the Hornsent, and that her early life was shaped by rites of flesh and spirit that predated both Erdtree and Golden Order. What she saw there, and what she lost there, would echo through every law she later forged. She was chosen as an Empyrean, a candidate to become a god in the greater will's design. With her came a shadow-bound beast, Malekith, sworn to guard her fate and enforce her will. Around her gathered the Two Fingers, a council of quiet hands that promised a new epoch to the lands between. The problem that faced this council was not merely political. It was metaphysical. True death, destined death, still lived within the Elden Ring as one of its runes. It meant that even gods could end, and that every crown might fall into dust. For the greater will, and for Marika's emerging vision, this was a threat to a lasting dominion. A world cannot be rendered stable while the possibility of final severance hangs over all things. Marika's answer was a sacrifice that became a doctrine. After Malekith had captured the rune of death, Marika removed it from the Elden Ring and had Malekith seal it within himself. In that moment, the Golden Order began. Death did not vanish, but it changed its shape. Bodies could fail, spirits could drift, yet fated death for demigods was withheld. Souls were pulled toward Erdtree burial, returning to the roots to be gathered and in time reborn. The order was gold because it promised permanence. It was an order because it declared a single hierarchy, with Marika as the one true god and the Erdtree as the axis of grace. The Erdtree rose as both symbol and engine. Some traditions say it was the crucible, refined into a single towering life. Others say it was nurtured by Marika's divinity once she bore the Elden Ring, its light drawn through her like sap. The mainstream view is simply that with Marika as vessel, the Erdtree became the world's central conduit of grace. Its golden leaves fell across the land, and where they settled, a new faith made homes. The Erdtree was not only a monument, it was the infrastructure of the Order's afterlife. To die within its reach was to be carried back to its roots, to be folded into the great cycle of return. This cycle was gentle in surface and consuming in depth. It took sorrow and turned it into continuity. It took endings and turned them into pauses. The first age of this order was an age of founding and unification. Marika took a consort, Huaralu, a warrior of feral strength. In the marriage rite, he was given a new name, Godfrey, and raised to be the first Elden Lord. Under their joint banner, the Erdtree's light spilled outward like dawn across a cold sea. Godfrey led the wars Marika required to secure her reign. Giants who tended a fell flame were humbled in the mountaintops, their ancient fire chained so it could never again threaten the Erdtree's reign. Stormlords who clung to old thunder were brought to heel, leaving Stormvale as a symbol of a conquered past. In the south and west, lesser dynasts were drawn into Erdtree allegiance by promise, pressure, and the quiet miracle of grace. In the east, wild lands were pacified by the steady march of knights who carried gold, not as loot, but as law. Even so, Marika was not a goddess of simple eradication. Where older faiths could be bonded into her gold without breaking it, she allowed the braid. The ancient dragon cult found a place in her capital because their lightning had turned golden, and their nobility could be read as compatible with Erdtree glory. Later, glintstone sorcery from Liurnia would be absorbed into the Order's scholarship, its methods reinterpreted through holy law rather than banished as impurity. Heresy in this early sense was defined not by strangeness but by threat. Anything that endangered the central promise of immortality and singular rule was cast out. Anything that could kneel, even if it came from older skies, might be welcomed. From Godfrey and Marika came the golden lineage, children who carried both authority and expectation. Their eldest, Godwyn the Golden, became a living emblem of the Order's ideal. He was gracious, brave, and open to reconciliation. When the ancient dragons attacked Lendel, he fought them with valor and then made peace with them, drawing their chief knight into an alliance of mutual respect. The City of Gold thus learned to live beside the storm it once feared. In Godwyn, the Order found a face that could smile. In Marika, it found a hand that did not tremble. Yet the Golden Order was not only a family, it was a device that had to feed itself. Grace, the golden radiance that issued from the Erdtree, was both blessing and leash. It chose champions, illuminated paths, and made obedience feel like destiny. It also enacted exclusions. The omen born with horns and tails were deemed relics of the crucible, too close to a time when all forms mingled. They were sequestered beneath the capital or forced into chains, their bodies treated as shameful proofs of an earlier disorder. The misbegotten, heirs to bestial blood, were pressed into servitude. The eternal cities below ground who had once defied the greater will and forged their own starry hopes were punished, their skies sealed, their people left in a night without dawn. The Golden Order was serene to those who fit its geometry. To those who did not, it was a gate closed in the face of their breath. This governance produced a society of layered sanctity. At the top sat Lendel, city of gold, where great trees were planted in plazas as mirrors of the Erdtree's authority. Beneath its vaulted avenues lived nobles and knights who bore golden crests, their duty to defend the divine center. Across the provinces stood minor Erdtrees and sacred springs, each attended by priests who read signs of grace in wind and leaf. Pilgrims walked between these sites, carrying charms, ashes, and memories. The Order's blessings were tangible. They healed sickness, strengthened harvests, and soothed fear of death with the promise of return. The Order's costs were also tangible. It required loyalty to a single god, participation in a single cycle of burial, and acceptance of a hierarchy whose apex was not human. As the wars of Maodan conquest slowed, Godfrey's role changed. The Order required a lord not only for battle, but for symbolic completeness. Yet with no external enemies to crush, his grace began to wane. The Erdtree's light, so attentive to purpose, withdrew from him and his warriors. Marika then enacted a second great movement, a hidden wanderer era sewn into policy. She banished Godfrey and his host beyond the fog that borders the lands between. They became the first Tarnished, stripped of grace, sentenced to live and die in distant lands. The exile was shown to the public as dismissal, but in quieter chronicles it was a seedbed. The Tarnished would grow strong through hardship and one day return when the Order required renewal. Marika's design was subtle. She was founding a reserve of human will outside the greater will's immediate gaze. To replace Godfrey, Marika turned toward a figure already rising by other paths. Radagon was a champion of red hair and stern devotion, first known in the wars against Liurnia. He had fought the Carian queen Renala, head of the Academy of Raya Lucaria, and after a long contest he laid down his sword in a peace sealed by marriage. Their union bridged gold and glintstone. From them were born Rani, Radan, and Rykard, children who carried both celestial scholarship and Erdtree authority. In this time, the Golden Order expanded not only through armies, but through diplomacy. Liurnia became a realm adjacent to the capital, rather than a ruin to be conquered. The Academy continued its studies under a watchful, not hostile eye. The Order thus looked tolerant, even wise. Renala's gift to Radagon was not only alliance, but a different kind of learning. Carian sorcery measured the stars and treated fate as a set of moving constellations. The Erdtree faith measured moral and metaphysical order in a more grounded way. The marriage created a corridor between sky and root. For a while in Liurnia, knights in golden armor walked beside scholars draped in blue, and hymns mingled with lectures. The Golden Order was at its most flexible then, bending without breaking. Then Radagon was called back to Lendel. He left Renala, and in the shadow of the Erdtree married Marika herself, becoming second Elden Lord and King Consort. In a secret that lay at the heart of the Order, Radagon and Marika were not wholly separate. The law of regression, a later fundamentalist rite, taught that all things yearn to converge toward a hidden unity. The mainstream reading in the lands between is that Radagon and Marika were two aspects of one god, divided and joined again, whether by divine requirement or by Marika's own metamorphosis. The exact origin of that duality remains veiled. Some accounts hold that Radagon began as an independent champion and was later merged with Marika. Others suggest he was always her other self, sent into the world to learn obedience and return with it. In any case, by the time he took the Elden Lord's mantle, the two operated as a shared vessel with tensions coiled inside a single flesh. Radagon brought with him an intensification of doctrine. The Golden Order had been a political theology of immortality. Under Radagon's hand, it also became an intellectual system called Golden Order fundamentalism. This school sought to explain the order not only as faith, but as law. It described reality through two linked forces, causality and regression, one binding events into chains, the other drawing meanings toward convergence. Fundamentalism prized study, ritual precision, and compassionate austerity. It produced incantations that healed through order, revealed falsehood, and sought to reconcile contradictions. In Radagon's mind, gold was not merely a color of rule. It was proof that the universe could make sense when properly read. The rise of fundamentalism shifted the order from a pastoral faith to a scholastic empire. Libraries grew in Lanedell, and preachers carried compact creeds to frontier villages. The language of holiness changed. Where earlier priests spoke in parables of the Erdtree's love, fundamentalists spoke of axioms. If souls return to the tree, then the tree must be central. If the Elden Ring defines law, then law must be singular and complete. Their writings were elegant, almost soothing, and yet their elegance carried sharp edges. A system that sees the world as solvable often has little patience for what refuses to be solved. Through Marika and Radagon were born twin Empyreans, Miquella and Malenia. The greater will had marked them as candidates for succession, each bearing strange gifts and strange wounds. Malenia carried the scarlet rot, a divine affliction tied to an outer power opposed to the Erdtree. Miquella was cursed with eternal youth, unable to reach full strength in body despite a mind of exceptional calm. These curses were a quiet antithesis to the Golden Order's promise. Even in its own house, gold could not prevent corruption or stasis from arriving in new forms. Around this time, other forces developed on the edges of the Order. The volcano of Mount Gelmir harbored a serpent cult, ancient and hungry, and Radagon's son Rykard turned to it in pursuit of a different immortality. Radan became a lion of war, apprentice to both gravity sorcery and Erdtree chivalry. Rani, studious and remote, listened to the call of the moon and the distant stars, wary of being made a puppet to the two fingers. Each child embodied a possible future for the Order, and each risked loosening its weave. The Golden Order's power was vast, yet it had limits that it could not erase without undoing itself. It could delay final death by sealing destined death, but it could not fully extinguish the memory of mortality. It could absorb certain older currents like dragon lightning and scholarly sorcery, but it could not reconcile with forces that proposed a different center, the frenzy that promised burning equality, the rot that promised decay as renewal, the cold pull of the dark moon offering a cosmos without the Erdtree, the black flame that once hunted gods. Whenever such currents rose, the Order either starved them with exclusion or met them with steel. The most dangerous early consequence of this new immortality was life in death. When destined death was removed, mortality in the lands between became a half thing. Bodies died, spirits returned to the Erdtree, yet the principle of true ending was absent. In such a world, a soul could fail to pass on, a corpse could refuse stillness. At first, the Order contained these accidents. Over time, the accidents became a movement. Those who live in death arose around fractured spirits and blighted roots. The Golden Order declared them heretical, not only because their state was unsettling, but because they proved that gold's immortality was imperfect. It was a leak in the wall, a whisper that the foundational sacrifice had not solved every consequence it created. Knights hunted them. Clerics preached against them, and yet each Erdtree burial fed the same system that made such beings possible. Marika herself began to learn that the promise of permanence carried a hidden price. Gold is light, but it is also stasis. The Erdtree's cycle of rebirth depended on a steady return of souls, on ritual obedience, on the continued authority of the greater will. If any part of that chain broke, the vision faltered. Marika's reign was thus bound to an outer god that had chosen her. To some it appeared as partnership. To Marika, perhaps, it began to feel like a cage, especially as echoes of her earlier life in the shadowed homeland pressed against her memory. The historical crisis that turned doubt into action was the Night of Black Knives. Rani, refusing the role of Empyrean pawn, arranged the theft of a fragment of destined death from Malekith. Using that stolen sliver, she and her agents forged blades that could kill a demigod's soul. Under a veil of winter fog, assassins struck Godwyn the Golden. He died in spirit while his body endured, becoming the Prince of Death, whose corrupted roots would spread deathroot across the land. At the same moment, Rani slew her own flesh, placing her soul into a doll and severing her fate from the two fingers. This was not merely murder. It was a thesis written in blood against the Golden Order. It declared that the sealed rune could be reached. It declared that immortality could be violated. It declared that the greater will's chosen path could be refused. The human consequence of this night was grief, confusion, and fear. For Leyndell, the first death of a demigod in recorded memory shattered the illusion that the Erdtree's embrace was absolute. For Marika, it was a wound that opened into revelation. The Golden Order had been founded to starve the threat of death, yet death had returned, twisted and partial by the very mechanism that had been used to suppress it. No amount of gold could now restore Godwyn's soul. The cycle of Erdtree burial meant to sustain harmony had been corrupted at its roots. After the Night of Black Knives, Marika's posture changed. She withdrew into the Erdtree's inner sanctums, and her echoes, heard later at her churches, speak of sharp resolve and veiled bitterness. She called Radagon her loyal hound, and noted that he was not yet fully her, not yet a god. She spoke of a future in which even they might be shattered. These words are remembered as both warning and intention. The prevailing understanding is that Marika began to doubt the greater will's governance itself. She had upheld its order, and the order had brought suffering and contradiction. Now she sought a way out, not for her freedom alone, but for the world's. Radagon did not share her dissent. His nature, whether born from Marika or apart from her, was a devotion to the Golden Order in its purest form. He repaired the Elden Ring with his hammer when it was whole. and later tried to repair it again when it was broken. He studied fundamentals, wrote laws, and clung to the geometry of gold as if it were salvation. Where Marika saw a prison, Radagon saw a house that could still be strengthened. The fracture between these two wills inside one god became the foreshadowed rupture of the age. One can feel it in the way the order strained against itself. Fundamentalists sought to reconcile contradictions through law, while older priests clung to simpler faith. Knights defended purity, while demigods explored heresy in secret. The Erdtree stood tall, yet its roots curled around a corpse that would not sleep. The outer powers watched with patient hunger, each waiting for the gold to falter. In those years, the lands between entered a hush of waiting. Miquella withdrew from Lendel, turning his gentle mind toward a different solution. He studied unalloyed gold, a refinement meant to resist outer corruption. He tried to heal millennia's rot, to protect those the Order rejected, to create a haven in the Erdtree where rebirth might have a kinder meaning. His path was not open rebellion at first. It was a parallel mercy, a soft indictment of the Order's cruelties. Millennia followed him in loyalty, her scarlet bloom held at bay by will alone. Ricard, by contrast, embraced open betrayal. He fed himself to the great serpent of Gelmir, seeking to devour gods and become a new principle of immortality through consumption. The manor that served him gathered recusants, warriors who turned their blades not against distant monsters, but against the Erdtree's own champions. Radon guarded the east, holding back the stars with gravity so that fate itself would not unspool too quickly. This act, in the Order's terms, was a service to stability. Yet it also froze a cosmos that the Golden Order had never fully understood. Ranni vanished into her own designs, her 2 fingers slain, her fate now bound to a colder order among the stars. Each of these movements was a tributary cutting away from the Erdtree's central river. Marika's final act in this part of the tale was the shattering. The exact trigger remains a matter of gentle dispute. Some chronicles emphasize her grief for Godwyn and her fury at the Greater Will's failure. Others point to deeper knowledge she may have uncovered about her origins and the Greater Will's prior conquests, perhaps tied to the erased people of her youth. What is certain is the deed itself. Marika took the Elden Ring and broke it. She did not annihilate it. She split its runes into great runes held by her children and kin. With that blow, she sundered the Golden Order's grammar. The Erdtree's light flickered. Grace began to scatter. The Greater Will's silence deepened into a heavy, incomprehensible pause. Radagon, in the same body, tried to mend what she had shattered. He struck the ring with the intent to restore, but restoration could not undo the will behind the break. His effort left the ring in fragments. The Elden Beast, embodiment of the Greater Will's vassal, bound Marika and Radagon within the Erdtree, imprisoning the god for her trespass. Gold became a cage of thorns around its own sovereign. The shattering led immediately to a war of succession. With the Elden Ring broken, the demigods sought to claim its pieces and become Elden Lord in a new age. This war was less a single campaign than a spreading sickness of ambition. The Golden Lineage fought to uphold inherited right. The twins of rot and unalloyed hope fought to protect a gentler future. The Serpent Lord fought to consume all futures. The Lunar Princess fought to erase the Erdtree's role entirely. The Lion of Caelid fought to preserve the world he knew, even if it meant holding the skies hostage. None could win. The great runes tainted their bearers with power that inflamed their flaws. Battles rose like storms in every region. In Limgrave, Godric the Grafted hoarded limbs and hid behind walls, clinging to a diluted heritage. In Lernia, the Academy sealed itself with sorceries, and Renala fell into grief, leaving a vacuum that knights and scholars could not easily fill. In Caelid, Radan's armies met Malenia's clean-wrought knights in a clash so vast that the horizon seemed to burn. When Malenia's rot finally bloomed, it did not only curse her. It drowned the plain in scarlet decay, turning forests to coral, beasts to carrion, and the proud east into a land that breathed sickness. This was the Golden Order's most vivid failure. A law meant to prevent decay had birthed a war that spread decay beyond measure. In the capital, Morgoth, an omen child of the Golden lineage, defended the Erdtree despite his birth's rejection by the Order. His loyalty was a quiet tragedy. He guarded a god who had despised his form, and a city that had hidden his kin beneath its streets. Yet in his mind, the Erdtree was still a home worth saving. Such contradictions show how deeply the Golden Order had sunk into the hearts of even those it wounded. In the north, other struggles flared and subsided. In the west, recusants and knights bled each other along volcanic ridges. In hidden groves, the Haligtree's defenders fought to keep their sanctuary alive. Still, none of the demigods could breach the Erdtree's sealed heart. The tree refused all claimants. Through refusal, it prolonged the war. The age that followed is not the Golden Order's rise, but its slow ruin. Yet ruin is not instant. It is a twilight full of stubborn habits. Lendel still prayed to Marika as a god even while she hung in chains. The two fingers still interpreted the greater will's faint signals even while their guidance grew erratic. Hunters of those who live in death still patrolled catacombs even as death roots spread. Fundamentalists still studied causality and regression even as causality itself frayed into chaos. Across the lands between, daily life narrowed. In villages without strong grace, people turned to lesser saints or local spirits. In castles drained by war, knights spoke of the old age as if it were a lullaby, a time when banners meant duty rather than survival. The Erdtree's leaves no longer fell with the same confident rhythm, and the guidance of grace wandered, sometimes lighting a path, sometimes leaving it dark. Even the priests felt this change. Some lamented it as decline, others treated it as a trial, believing that gold would return if they endured. In this long twilight, another movement prepared itself in silence, the return of the Tarnished. Grace, withheld for generations, reached again for those exiles beyond the fog. The greater will, or perhaps Marika in defiance of it, called them home to gather the great runes and mend the Elden Ring. The Round Table Hold appeared as a gathering place between worlds, staffed by spirits of the old order and guided by a crumbling set of ideals. Among the Tarnished rose a champion without a name fixed by history. Their journey would decide what shape, if any, the Golden Order could take in an age after its own shattering. Before that journey begins, it is worth resting on the hinge between glory and fracture. The Golden Order was born from a desire to make the world gentle through permanence. It removed destined death to save gods and mortals from final severance. It unified the lands between, braided old customs into new law, and cultivated a civilization where gold meant grace. At the same time, it shaped exclusions that left many in chains. It enforced stasis that hid rot behind bright walls. It relied on a cosmic patron whose will did not always match the hearts of its vessels. Its central miracle, immortality by Erdtree return, produced a shadowed counter-miracle, life and death. In Marika, the Order found a founder capable of both tenderness and cruelty, patience and urgency, unity and betrayal. In Radagon, it found a conscience of law that could not bend when the world required bending. Their shared body held the Order together until the weight of contradiction forced it to crack. The Night of Black Knives proved the seal on death could be broken. The shattering proved the seal on order could also be broken. The war that followed proved that no demigod could carry gold alone. In the quiet after those proofs, the Erdtree still towers, a luminous memory above a scarred land. Its light falls on ruins, on abandoned battlefields, on cathedrals where priests speak to empty air. The Golden Order is not dead in this moment, not yet. It waits, fractured and stubborn, for a hand to gather its runes, for a will to choose whether gold will be restored, transformed, or finally let go. In the wake of the shattering, the lands between did not fall into silence. They fell into a kind of endless arguing, as if every hill and river were taking sides in a dispute about what reality should be. The great runes were fragments of law, and each bearer became a walking principle. Where one walked, the land bent. Where two met, it bled. The Erdtree closed its heart, and grace wandered like a lantern carried by an unsteady hand. Many people learned to live without certainty. They planted crops in ash-dark soil, said prayers to statues that no longer answered, and watched the sky for signs that did not come. The Golden Order lingered in these years as a habit more than a triumph. Its churches still stood, their doors open even when their altars were cold. Its priests still spoke of Marika as the one true God, even though her body was broken within the tree. Its knights still polished golden crests, even when their oaths could no longer be fulfilled by any lord. The Order had once been a river fed by a single source. Now it was a delta scattered into channels that sometimes met, sometimes dried, sometimes flowed backward. Yet the greater will did not abandon the world entirely. Whether by its faint remaining guidance or by Marika's last hidden design, grace reached beyond the fog to the Tarnished. These were the exiles of Godfrey's host and their distant descendants, people who had lived without gold in foreign lands and who carried a rougher kind of hope. The return of grace did not restore the order, it reopened the question of order. It called the Tarnished home to gather the scattered runes, to decide what law would replace lawlessness. The signal was quiet, almost reluctant, but its meaning was clear across the ages. The old structure had failed. A new one had to be chosen. The Tarnished came home to a world that had forgotten mercy. They walked roads lined with hollow soldiers who could not truly die because destined death was still sealed and imperfect mortality had become common. They passed through villages where those with crucible traits were still treated as shame, where misbegotten still carried chains, and where the omen still hid when footsteps approached. These cruelties were not fresh inventions of the shattering. They were the Golden Order's old, exclusion surviving into collapse. The Order had taught the land which bodies counted as pure. Even in ruin, the lesson endured. In Lendel, the capital's gates were watched by Morgoth, called the Omen King, though he was the least kingly of tyrants. He defended the Erdtree not for reward, but for belief. His whole life had been a wound carried in obedience. The Order had rejected his birth, and still he clung to it as if faith alone could make acceptance arrive. In him, the Golden Order's tragedy became visible, a law that could inspire loyalty even in those it harmed. He barred the way to the Erdtree because he believed that no claimant after the shattering could be worthy to restore it. His refusal was stern, but it was also protective, as if he feared that a careless hand might complete a ruin that had only begun. Beyond the walls, other demigods persisted in their own shapes of decay. Godric in Stormvale used grafting to mimic a strength he did not possess, turning inherited royalty into a grotesque collage. Radagon, stranded in his own battle's aftermath, roamed Caelid in rot-mad hunger, a lion reduced to a storm of appetite. Malenia slept within her scarlet bloom, her stillness the price of holding extinction back from spreading further. Rykard's serpent self coiled in Gelmir, devouring followers and foes alike, insisting that consumption was a higher mercy than gold. Rennala drifted in sorrow in the Academy's moonlit hall, clutching a broken egg of rebirth as if it could undo Radagon's leaving. These were not only rulers, they were symptoms of what happens when cosmic law is fractured and left to be shouldered by fallible beings. The Tarnished champion moved through this field of ossified wills, gathering runes not as trophies but as verbs that could be used at the end of the road. The Golden Order had once removed a rune to prevent death. Now the question was which rune or which principle would be added to mend the ring. In this sense, the Tarnished journey was not merely conquest. It was a moral survey of the world Marika had built and broken. Among the first truths the Tarnished learned was that not all who opposed the Golden Order did so from malice. Some did so from sorrow. Some did so from a desire for a gentler order. The Round Table's scholars spoke of the order as a sacred inheritance, but the land itself spoke of its costs. Every catacomb filled with restless dead, every shunned child beneath the capital, every village of misbegotten laboring without dignity, offered the same quiet testimony. Gold had not made the world whole. It had made parts of the world invisible. In Liurnia, the inheritance of gold and moon stood in unresolved tension. The Carrion line had once joined the Order through Radagon, but that bridge had collapsed with his departure. Sorcerers who remained loyal to the Erdtree had their own small chapels within the Academy. Others clung to the moon's colder independence. This is where the Tarnished met Ranni's shadowed path indirectly, through the ruins of old alliance. Ranni had rejected the two fingers and the fate of Empyrean succession, carving her own flesh away so her soul could escape the greater will's leash. Her rebellion set the shattering in motion, and yet it also opened a door to a world where outer powers would not rule by placing crowns on chosen heads. Her vision was not of golden permanence, but of distant, quiet law set among the stars. In Altus and the foothills, the Tarnished found signs of another kind of descent, one born from thought rather than revolt. Brother Corin and the masked Sage Goldmask wandered in search of a flaw within the Golden Order itself. Their discipline belonged to Golden Order fundamentalism with its twin lenses of causality and regression, seeking patterns of meaning and convergence beneath surface chaos. Goldmask did not curse Marika as a tyrant. He treated her and Radagon as fallible nodes within a system that should have been flawless. To him, the Golden Order was not wrong in aim. It was wrong in execution because its god had been fickle. In the stillness of his meditations, he sought a rune that would perfect the order by removing the instability of divine personality. His work implied that gold, stripped of caprice, might finally become what it promised. far below the Erdtree in the deep-root depths, the Tarnished encountered the most haunting aftermath of the Night of Black Knives. Godwin's corpse had rooted into the earth like a diseased tree. Deathroot spread from him into catacombs and graves, producing those who live in death, beings caught between ending and return. At his throne waited Fia, a deathbed companion who held a different doctrine of mercy. She did not see life and death as a crime. She saw it as the inevitable consequence of sealing destined death, and thus as something that should be accepted into law rather than purged. The rune she gestated was not meant to destroy the Golden Order, but to amend it, restoring a rightful place for true death, and for those born from its partial absence. Her quiet tenderness toward the Prince of Death was another mirror held to Marika's founding sacrifice. Gold had tried to abolish endings. Fia wished to make endings compassionate again. In the sewers beneath the capital, other mirrors waited, far less gentle. The Dung-Eater, a figure of rancid despair, carried a mending rune of a different intention. He believed the Golden Order's hierarchy had only ever been a mask for cruelty, and that the only honest future was one steeped in the same defilement that had already ruined the world. His path was not acceptance, but contagion, a desire to make every lineage cursed so no one could claim purity over another. The Golden Order had starved impurity. He wished to enthrone it. The Tarnished met him not as a teacher, but as a warning of what rage becomes when it cannot imagine healing. There was also the path of frenzy, hidden beneath another veil. The three fingers and envoys of the frenzied flame offered a doctrine that burned distinctions away. In its insistence, suffering was proof that existence itself was a mistake, and that the only mercy was to melt all things into one undifferentiated fire. This outer power was not a rival heir to the Golden Order. It was an opposite, treating order as a lie and individuation as a wound. The Golden Order had promised unity through structured hierarchy. The frenzied flame promised unity through annihilation. Their antithesis revealed the spectrum of possible futures now laid before the Tarnished. Through all these encounters, the Golden Order became less a single story and more a question carried in many hands. Was gold worth restoring? Could it be perfected? Should it be amended to include death? Should it be replaced by colder starlight? Should it be dissolved in fire? Or should it be left fractured, its pieces allowed to settle into some unplanned equilibrium? These were not only metaphysical choices, they were human consequences, shaping what a mother could promise a child, what a soldier could die for, what a village could hope to become. The Tarnished's climb toward the Erdtree passed through the mountaintops where the Golden Order's oldest war still breathed. The giant's fell flame, once chained by Godfrey's conquest, still smoldered under guard. That fire had always been the Erdtree's mortal threat, able to burn the tree's body and open its sealed heart. Its continued existence was another contradiction Marika had left behind. She had defeated the giants to preserve gold, then left their flame as a dormant key to gold's undoing. The Tarnished's fate required touching that key, not out of malice but necessity. The Erdtree had closed because the Order had fractured. To enter, one had to risk the same fire that the Order had sworn to bury. When the giant flame was kindled, the Erdtree's thorns became apparent, a bramble wall of refusal. It was not simply a physical barrier. It resembled a verdict. The greater will through the Elden Beast had declared that no demigod of the shattering could be trusted to mend what Marika broke. It would only accept a lord forged by struggle from outside the golden lineage. That decision carried its own irony. The Golden Order, founded on singular divine rule, now relied upon a mortal exile to decide its future. Within the ashen capital, the Tarnished met remnants of history in their most exhausted form. The city's gold had dulled into gray. Statues still stood, but their faces were eroded by smoke. The great dragon corpse above the boulevard still lay where it fell in the old wars. The Erdtree was no longer a shining canopy. It was a vaulted shadow that rained ash instead of leaves. In this place, the past and its promises felt heavy. The Golden Order, once a dawn, now resembled a long sunset that could not decide whether to end. At the tree's root, the final guardians of gold waited. Radagon, fused with Marika's body, rose as a figure of red hair and fractured devotion. He was law become muscle. He fought not for conquest, but for the idea that the Golden Order, in its original form, was still the rightful shape of reality. The Elden Beast, a cosmic creature of glittering law, followed as the Greater Will's last insistence. Their presence made a final statement about the Order. The system might be broken, but the cosmic patron behind it still desired restoration on its terms. When these guardians fell, the Tarnished stood before the broken god, fractured Marika, and the shattered Elden Ring. Then the choice arrived, not as a menu of mechanics, but as a mythic hinge. The Tarnished could mend the ring with no added rune, restoring a basic form of the old order. Or they could brandish one of several mending runes, each a doctrine meant to reshape gold itself. The endings that followed are not separate tales. They are possible responses to the Golden Order's rise and ruin. In the simplest mending, sometimes called the Age of Fracture, the Tarnished becomes Elden Lord and restores the Elden Ring much as it was, leaving Marika's foundational structure intact. There is no explicit reform, only continuity. The Erdtree's cycle resumes, grace stabilizes, and the Golden Order persists in a repaired but still flawed state. This ending reflects the Order's greatest strength and its deepest weakness. It can survive almost anything as long as someone believes survival is enough. In Goldmask's Mending, the Age of Order, the Tarnished uses the rune of perfect order, a principle designed to remove the instability of godly caprice from the Golden Order. Under this doctrine, gold is made more absolute, more mechanical, less vulnerable to the moods and betrayals of a living god. Marika and Radagon's dual conflict is treated as the root flaw, and the new rune seeks to keep law pure by stripping it of personal weakness. The consequence is a world where the Golden Order becomes closer to what fundamentalists dreamed, a serene structure without deviation. Whether such serenity is mercy or austerity remains a quiet question, one the age itself would have to answer through lived time. In Fia's Mending, the Age of the Duskborn, the rune of the Death Prince is used to weave true death back into the Order, granting those who live in death a rightful place within reality rather than perpetual persecution. This doctrine does not topple gold but softens its cruelty. It admits that destined death was part of the world's health, and that its removal birthed a shadowed suffering. By restoring death's legitimacy, the New Age allows endings to be real again, and thus allows life to gain a different dignity. The Erdtree would still stand, but it would no longer be the only gate through which souls must pass. In the Rune of Despair, the Dung Eater's doctrine spreads defilement into the Elden Ring, ensuring that every lineage carries a curse and that no one can claim purity. This is a deliberate inversion of the Golden Order's obsession with immaculate hierarchy. The human consequence is grim. Equality achieved not by lifting the lowly, but by dragging all into the same poisoned water. It is a future that mirrors the Order's violence back at itself until the mirror and the face become indistinguishable. Then there are endings that step away from gold almost entirely and thus comment on its ruin by refusal rather than reform. In the Age of Stars, Ranni's doctrine removes the Elden Ring and the Erdtree from immediate rule. The Tarnished becomes her consort, and together they set the world's governing law under the distant chill of the moon and stars. The greater will's guidance is severed, and outer gods are held at a colder remove. This future interprets the Golden Order's failure as proof that no outer power should rule by incarnating itself in a single god or tree. By taking law far from touch, Ranni offers the world freedom mixed with uncertainty, a cosmos where meaning is not handed down as grace but found as wandering. In the Lord of Frenzied Flame, the Tarnished inherits the Three Fingers fire and burns the Erdtree and all distinctions in a world-ending blaze. This ending is a final indictment of every structured order, golden or otherwise. It sees the Golden Order not as a flawed attempt at mercy, but as a chapter in a longer book of suffering that can only be closed by erasing the page itself. If one stays close to the Golden Order's story, three of these futures speak most directly to its rise and ruin: fracture, order, and duskborn. They are the three ways gold can respond to its own collapse. It can persist unchanged, it can perfect itself into a stricter calm, or it can accept death and the rejected as part of law. Each future echoes a face of Marika. She who founded gold to prevent death would see persistence as loyalty. She who doubted gold's cruelty would see duskborn as repentance. She who struggled against outer powers would see order as a gamble that law without a fallible god might finally be free. The game of fate does not tell which face is true, it allows the world to choose which face will rule. Even these endings do not end the Golden Order's tale cleanly. They show that order in the lands between is always provisional, always subject to other stars and other hungers. The outer gods do not vanish when one doctrine rises. They retreat, regroup, and wait for cracks. The scarlet rot still exists as a power, even if a needle can hold it at bay. The frenzied flame still smolders beneath the ground, even if its lord is denied. The formless mother still whispers in blood, even if her champion is slain. The Golden Order's rise taught the world that a cosmic patron can reshape reality. Its ruin taught the world that reality can reject a patron. The story of Miquella sits like a quiet thread through these conclusions. He is the Golden Order's child who loved gold's promise but hated its cruelties. His unalloyed gold, a refinement that resists interference from outer gods, was his attempt to solve the Order's central problem without repeating its sins. He tried to heal Malenia, to shelter Albinaurix and Misbegotten, to grow the Erdtree as a new axis of grace untainted by the greater will's strictness. His failure and disappearance, and later the revelations surrounding him in the realm of shadow, show that even alternative mercies can be captured by ambition. In the end, he remains a reminder that the Golden Order's ruin was not caused by one betrayal alone, but by the deep instability of any order that concentrates cosmic law into a single lineage. Marika's origin in the shadowed homeland adds another hush to this myth. The realm of shadow, once central to the crucible and later veiled away, was the place of her first vows and first wounds. That hidden history suggests that her rise to godhood required acts she later buried, and that her founding of the Golden Order was entangled with both seduction by the greater will and betrayal of older kin. The Golden Order thus began not as pure revelation, but as a choice made in a fraught world. Its ruin, then, is not a cosmic accident. It is an inevitability seated where choice and fear first met. Seen from a distance, the Golden Order's arc becomes a cycle of promises and costs. It promised a world without final death and created a world where death became a half-broken curse. It promised unity under a single god and produced a lineage fractured by ambition and outer influence. It promised purity and left generations of crucible-touched people to live in shame. It promised stability and ended in a war that scarred the land beyond easy healing. And yet it also held the lands between together long enough for gentler refusals to be imagined. Without its long peace, perhaps Miquella would never have dreamed of shelter. Ranni would never have learned the cost of fate. Goldmask would never have sought a better geometry. And the Tarnished would never have been called back to choose at all. The Golden Order was not only a tyranny, it was a stage on which other visions learned to speak. In the quiet of whatever age follows, the Erdtree still stands in memory, even if its dominance is altered or its ashes scatter on wind. People still tell stories of the time when leaves of gold fell like soft rain, when grace made roads and death felt less frightening. They also tell stories of the horns chained under the capital, of corpses that would not sleep, of queens who broke their own bodies to escape puppet strings. These stories do not cancel each other. They coexist, as all true myth does, holding contradiction like a lamp holds flame. The lands between remain a place where cosmic law and human longing meet. The Golden Order's rise showed the power of a doctrine to reorder reality. Its ruin showed the fragility of any doctrine when it denies the full complexity of life and death. The Tarnished era shows something else again, that even a shattered law can be remade into multiple shapes, each reflecting what the world has learned from suffering. So the tale settles into its last calm breath for now. Gold was a dawn, then a noon, then a twilight. It tried to end endings and thus invited new kinds of ending. It tried to silence other stars and thus taught mortals to listen for them. It tried to hold the world still and thus revealed how fiercely the world moves beneath any hand. In some futures, the Golden Order rises again, repaired and shining as if no lesson were required. In some, it is perfected into a strict serenity where the gods' flaws can no longer ripple outward. In some, it is softened by the return of death, allowing dusk to be part of day. In others, the world steps away from gold entirely, walking under moonlight or into fire. None of these futures are final in the sense Marika once desired. Finality was the illusion that founded her order. The lesson of her ruin is that law is always a conversation between sky and soil, between outer will and inner grief, between what is feared and what is loved. The conversation continues, not yet ended, threads of fate still moving through root and star alike. Part 2 already brought the script to a full ending per your 15K, 2-part spec. Since you said continue, here's an extra quiet coda in the same sleep-friendly voice, flowing straight from the ending. The world that follows any mending is never only the world of runes. It is also the world of habits. Even when a new law is set into the Elden Ring, the lands between keep breathing through the grooves worn by the old one. The Golden Order left such grooves everywhere, in stone, in prayer, in the way people look at the sky before they speak. There are places where gold will always feel like home. In the capital's broken avenues, the memory of leaflight lingers in the mind even when the branches have changed. In old churches on quiet hills, the statues of Marika remain, not because every age must obey her, but because she was once the language by which lives were understood. A peasant's burial, a knight's oath, a child's first blessing, all once moved in her cadence. The Golden Order replaced the older fear of destined death with the gentler promise of Erdtree burial. And that promise shaped how ordinary people learn to grieve. When grief has been taught to trust a cycle, it does not unlearn trust quickly. There are also places where gold will always feel like a wound. Beneath Lendel, the tunnels still remember chains. The crucible touched were hidden there, and the omen were made to believe they were mistakes that needed to be buried. The misbegotten toiled under banners that called their bodies impure. These judgments were not accidents of war. They were policies that sat inside the Golden Order's vision of purity. Even when a new age rises, the echo of those exclusions may remain in the way a village treats a horned child, or in the way a soldier hesitates before calling a beast-blooded comrade by name. In this way, the Golden Order is less a single regime than a long weather. It brought harvest and shelter to many. It also dried out other kinds of life until they cracked. The same Erdtree that fed a kingdom also starved lineages that did not fit its design. The same immortality that calmed fear also created the half-death of restless corpses. A law that changes the shape of death changes the shape of mercy with it. In the land of shadow, veiled beyond the Erdtree's direct light, Marika's buried beginnings add another measure of quiet to any future. The realm of shadow is described in recent chronicles as a hidden region tied to the Skadu tree, once the domain of the Hornsent who revered the crucible's tangled vitality. The same chronicles suggest that Marika first set foot and later rose toward godhood in that shadowed country. The details of her ascent remain partly interpretive in the surviving record, but the shape of the revelation is steady. Gold did not begin in a vacuum. It began in a land where older rites of life and flesh were practiced, where communities were already broken by sacred hunger, and where Marika learned what it meant for a people to be used as fuel for someone else's divinity. Screen rant. To hold that history is to understand why the Golden Order carries both tenderness and iron. A founder who has known helplessness may crave permanence. A founder who has watched chaos devour a home may seek a single unshakable rule. The Greater Will offered Marika a path that promised stability through singularity, and she took it. But singularity has a hunger of its own. It asks everything else to become secondary. It asks mercy to obey structure. It asks the many to kneel to the one. If the Tarnished restores the Golden Order without correction, then the old weather returns with all its old seasons. The Erdtree's cycle becomes central again, and the land is lulled by the same promise Marika first offered. If the Tarnished perfects the order through a higher geometry, then gold becomes a stricter climate, calmer, colder, more consistent with fewer surprises from the gods that inhabit it. The tradition of Golden Order fundamentalism already leaned in this direction, treating the order as an elegant system grounded in causality and regression, a chain of meaning bound by convergence. A perfected order would be that scholastic dream-made world. It might be kinder by removing godly whim, or harsher by removing the soft irregularity that allows exceptions. If the Tarnished folds true death back into law, then the Erdtree's light changes its tone. The returning of destined death in spirit, not as a weapon but as a rightful place in the cycle, dissolves the old contradiction at the order's root. It allows endings to be honest again, and therefore allows life to become more than a rehearsed return. Such an age does not necessarily erase gold. It makes gold admit dusk. The paths that depart from gold entirely also remain as long shadows. The Age of Stars is a reminder that the world can be governed without an Erdtree at its center, with fate set at a distance where outer wills are less able to tighten their fingers around flesh. The frenzied flame is a reminder that despair can always offer the false comfort of erasure. Even when denied, these possibilities remain in memory like doors that cannot be locked without also locking the mind. No matter which age rises, the demigod's stories become parables. Godwin's half-death teaches that immortality without true death invites corruption. Millennia's rot teaches that imposed purity cannot prevent other gods from planting their seeds. Miquella's Erdtree dream teaches that gentleness can be a doctrine too, but that doctrine still needs a guard against ambition. Rani's refusal teaches that consent matters in any sacred council, even if the council sits beyond the stars. Radagon's final stand teaches that devotion to a system can be noble and also catastrophic when it cannot accept what the world has become. The land itself will keep translating these parables into simple daily choices. A farmer will decide whether to bury the dead at roots or let them rest in open earth. A lord will decide whether to accept a crucible-marked knight in his hall or send him to the margins. A priest will decide whether to preach gold as destiny or gold as one chapter in a longer, humbler story. These choices are not noisy. They are the quiet way reality answers doctrine over generations. In the farthest corners, the Erdtree's memory may thin into legend. Children may someday hear of a time when a tree ruled the sky, and imagine it the way one imagines old beasts that no longer walk the plains. Yet even legend has weight. A legend teaches caution. A legend teaches longing. The Golden Order may become a cautionary tale about the cost of denying death. It may become a longing for a peace that never fully existed. It may become both at once, and in that tension the lands between will continue to live. Perhaps that is the last gift Marika unknowingly left behind. She tried to make order final, to freeze the world into a perfect gold that could outlast every fracture. By failing, she revealed that no order can be final unless it also understands change. She showed that law must breathe with the people who live under it. She showed that divinity, when too certain of itself, becomes brittle. She showed that the world is not a temple meant to be sealed. It is a field meant to be tended again and again by hands that learn from what the last harvest cost. So the age turns not in triumph, not in despair, but in the slow, ordinary way of surviving. Gold will be remembered as light. Gold will be remembered as shadow. And the lands between, under whatever sky follows, will keep walking the line between the two. Not yet at rest, not yet finished, still held by threads of fate that refuse to snap cleanly, even when a ring is broken and mended and broken again.